Welcome along to Eye on Africa, our daily look across the continent here on France 24, our main stories. Senegal's Macky Sall rules out running for president again after months of tension over suggestions that he was considering a third term in office in next year's presidential election. Critics said it was unconstitutional. We'll be live to Dakar at the top of the bulletin for the very latest. In Mozambique, residents begin returning to Cabo Delgado on the northern coast after years of deadly Islamist insurgency. The Defence Ministry has warned there's a long way to go before things can return to normal in the gas-rich province. And digital opportunity in the desert. We head to Turkana in northern Kenya, the poorest county in the country, where an NGO is taking on the task of training up locals in the latest tech. Thanks very much for joining us here on France 24. First up, Senegal's President Macky Sall has ruled out running for another term in office after months of suspense and tension over suggestions that he was considering a bid for a third term. In what appeared to be a long, thought-out national address, Sall repeatedly spoke of national unity, peace and stability as he announced his decision.
Mes chers compatriotes,
dear countrymen, I have decided, after much considered thought, not to run for the next presidential election in February 2024. And this, even though the Constitution allows it.
For the very latest, we can now cross live to Sam Bradpeace, who's in the capital, Dakar, for us. Sam, very good to have you along. We've just heard the president's announcement not to run again for office. Is his decision a surprise?
This decision is a huge surprise because Macky Sall has been asked whether he would run for a third term or not for months on end now. You could say even over the past year, he's been questioned repeatedly about it, and he's refused to give an answer up until today. This lack of answer, this lack of response, led people to think that he would take the controversial step of running for a third term, something that most legal experts would agree is unconstitutional. As you mentioned, he said he took his decision for the unity of the country. Senegal has gone through an unprecedented period of deadly violence in recent months, with more than a dozen people killed in recent protests. And so perhaps this decision comes as a way to kind of dampen this public resentment towards the state and towards authority here in Senegal.
And as we said, the news has just come in the past minute. So what's been the immediate reaction there in the capital?
I mean, beyond surprise, I've already spoken to a couple of Senegalese contacts that I have here. There does seem to be a great sensation of relief. As I mentioned, the country has gone through an incredibly tense period of violence, street violence, and the main opposition leader here, Ousmane Sonko, had called on his supporters to take to the street to protest should Macky Sall run for a third term. Not only did that bring fears of further violence, but it also brought fears of disruption to business. Many business activities here in Senegal have been disrupted by the recent period of unrest, and so many people will be happy to go about their activities as usual and not to have to brace themselves for that kind of disruption. Human rights groups have also been celebrating the decision.
It seems as if there's been something of a collective sigh of relief there. Sam Bradpeace, our correspondent in the capital, Dakar, thank you very much for that latest. Moving on now to South Africa, where the main opposition party has formed a coalition in a bid to end the ANC's nearly 3 decades in power. The Democratic Alliance has a fifth of seats in parliament. It has now teamed up with 6 smaller groups, excluding the third largest party, the leftist Economic Freedom Fighters, led by the firebrand Julius Malema. The coalition is to hold talks in August to map out their plans to overthrow the ANC in elections next year. Kenya's president has lifted a ban on logging despite opposition from environmental groups. William Ruto said the move would create jobs and open up the economy, saying it was long overdue. The moratorium was imposed in 2018 to eliminate illegal logging and increase the nation's forest cover. Greenpeace Africa warned reversing it would have catastrophic environmental consequences for rare species and millions of locals who depend on the forests for their livelihood. Next up, as inflation appears to be slowing in some parts of the world, some African economies are now suffering the consequences of developed nations' efforts to combat rising prices. In many countries across the continent, the US dollar is the main currency for international transactions. But as interest rates rise, the greenback is drying up, also sending import prices upwards. Sonoj Mujan tells us more.
The demand for Kenyan tea is not the problem. It's a shortage of dollars to buy it that is. This Kenyan cooperative sells 60% of its tea to Pakistan. But with Karachi struggling to pay for its imports, upfront payments in dollars temporarily ceased. This is just one example of how a dollar shortage in one nation can exacerbate a shortage in another. For Kenya, too, is in the midst of a dollar crisis. Its foreign exchange reserves are at an 8-year low. Dollar shortages can be caused by a number of factors. Inflation makes importing goods more expensive, especially for poorer nations. So these countries tap into their dollar reserves to buy essentials like food and medicine, as well as to pay off their dollar-denominated debt. To avert a crisis, Kenya and other African nations have been looking to trading more in local currencies.
With the experiences we have of a dollar shortage, that's the direction now our African countries should get into, where they can trade with their own currencies. So for us, if that is embraced, the way South Africa, they don't deal with the dollar, they deal with their rand, that becomes better for all of us.
Bypassing the dollar is an option that some countries are increasingly taking. 70% of global reserves a decade ago, the dollar now accounts for under 60% of reserves. Be it in Cuba, Venezuela, Nigeria, or Ghana, poorer nations are struggling to pay for imports. 1 in 4 emerging and developing countries have lost access to bond markets, according to the IMF. And it's these bond markets that give them essential access to foreign currencies to pay for things like food and petrol.
We head now to Mozambique, where residents have begun returning to Cabo Delgado on the northern coast. The gas-rich province has been devastated by years of deadly Islamist insurgency, but even as locals head back home, the Defence Ministry says there's a long way to go before things can return to normal. Caroline Lamberley takes a look.
The streets of Palma in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province are once again bustling. But soldiers are everywhere, a reminder that security is still fragile. After years of an Islamist insurgency that displaced hundreds of thousands of people, many have returned home. There, they were confronted with memories of what had pushed them to leave.
Back then, we could hear bullets being fired every single day. That's why we chose to flee.
We walked around 150 kilometers. Along the way, we would go to sleep hungry. Sometimes we would get soaking wet in the bushes. We lost our children and our possessions.
Flanked by Tanzania to the north, Mozambique's gas-rich Cabo Delgado province has been grappling with an Islamist insurgency since 2017. Thousands of people have lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands were displaced. Following a major attack in Palma in March 2021, South Africa and Rwanda sent troops to assist the Mozambican armed forces. As the security situation improves, international companies are also mulling a return to Cabo Delgado, like France's Total Energy. It had halted operations in the province following the Palma attack, just a few kilometers from the site of a $20 billion LNG project, in which Total holds a leading 26.5% stake.
And we end this bulletin in Turkana in northern Kenya, where an NGO has set up a university to train up locals in the latest tech. The region is rich in history. It's a cradle of mankind, but it's also the country's poorest, and it's in the middle of the desert, which means keeping your cool in class is another challenge. This report from our team in Turkana.
In the heart of the Turkana desert, this school welcomes young students from across the region for courses in digital technology.
There's some artificial intelligence software that would edit some music.
Quality hardware and stable internet connection are hard to come by in the remote county. Since the school opened in 2020, over 680 people have attended classes here.
Having built a campus like this that offers these chances to do IT stuff and design, it's something really nice that this campus has done. And the other thing that I like about it is we don't get to study for that long. They only give us the skills that are very important at the moment, and they help us explore the market.
Website creation, photography, design. The training lasts for about 1 year. After a first taster workshop, students can then choose a specialty.
This level ideally prepares them for the real-world jobs. And so after here, we expect that with many programs that we partners that come along, they would probably be working in different fields. And we also train them in these skills so that they can be freelancers.
All trainees are hosted on campus, which is still under construction. Brian gives us a tour of his somewhat peculiar accommodation.
Then you can be sleeping outside, yet you are still inside the bedroom. When there is cold, you come inside.
Everything here was designed to survive the heat. The mastermind behind the buildings is Francis Kéré, a world-famous architect from Burkina Faso and winner of the Pritzker Prize.
We shared with him our vision, and he visited here, and he experienced the heat. He experienced the wind directions. He experienced the directions of the sun. And so he went, combined all those things, and combining all those, he gave us this amazing building.
This famous name is attracting investors. Soon, additional buildings will increase the school's capacity to a total of 250 students.
And that's it for this bulletin, but do stay with us here on France 24. The latest headlines are up next.
It's called crystal meth, also named the cocaine of the poor. It's cheap, very strong, and one of the world's most addictive drugs.
Alte Kaputt. Ich bin Krankenschwester, konsumiere Pflege, jemand, der in der Pflege arbeitet, sterben halt viele dran.
Crystal meth was previously limited to Eastern Europe, but wide-scale trafficking in the Netherlands is now flooding Germany with the poison. This drug is a very lucrative market for international organized crime.
Dus zelfs Mexicanen die hier aan de slag gaan met hun drugshandel.
Crystal meth is a scourge that's poisoning all of Europe. Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.